Alright, this video is going to go over how to configure remote access on a Cisco router and a Cisco switch. It is to accompany a lab in my class. If you're in the class, the order in the lab is going to be a little different than we're doing things here because I have you set some stuff up in the beginning and then later on we do some other stuff. So I'm going to demonstrate some things that will be a little different than what you're going to run into in the lab, but we should be able to manage that. So the first thing we need to do is make sure we have IP connectivity. I have already configured my little environment for inter VLAN routing for VLAN 2 and VLAN 3. I have IP addresses 2.1 and 3.1 on my router and 2.2 and 3.2 on my PCs. So this is similar to what you should end up with at the end of the lab when you get to the part where it tells you to do this remote access stuff. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to configure the router for Telnet. And the way we need to do that is we edit the VTY lines. I think VTY stands for virtual terminal, 0 to 15. And then we need to tell it we want set a password. We'll set that to Cisco. And then we need to tell it to enable login on the VTY lines. And that's pretty much the basic config for Telnet. Probably shouldn't use Telnet because Telnet's not encrypted and we're connecting to our router, and everything we pass across that line will be able to be intercepted by someone if they're sniffing in the path, so you should be aware of that. So you type Telnet in the IP address and then you put in the password of Cisco, and hey, check it out, I'm on the router. Before you can do anything useful though, you need to type enable, and on my particular router I haven't set the enable password on purpose, so I could demonstrate that if you don't have the enable password set, when you try to connect, it's not going to let you get elevated access, so you need to set the enable password. So we'll do that with the enable secret command because we want the password to be encrypted, and then we'll set it to something. I'm going to set it to class. So if we look at our running config, we see that the enable secret is in there and the password's hashed. If we were to use the other option for that command, it's enable password and the password would be in the clear text. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to do enable secret. So now if I go back and type enable, it's going to ask me for the password. I type class. I obtained elevated access. So that's the very basics of how to configure Telnet, which you should have already done further up in the lab if you're following along in the lab sheet. Next thing we want to do is enable SSH so we can have a more secure connection. So we're going to do that on the router. And the first thing we need to do, or a thing we need to do, is to generate keys for SSH. So crypto key generate and RSA. We're going to generate an RSA key. And if you try to do that, for you it might work. It's probably not going to work because we didn't set everything yet. But for me, it's not going to work because I haven't set a host name yet. It wants you to actually have an actual host name instead of the word router. So I'm going to set my host name to last name dash router because we want we're going to do the router and the switch, so that'll make it easier. And I want you to set it to your last name. So I did that. And let's try the crypto key now. Oh hey, it still wants us to enter in a domain name before we can do that. So we'll set that to IP domain name. Set it to cnt.lab because that's a domain we use in the lab. So now let's try to generate a key. Oh hey, it'll let us generate the key now. It defaults to 512, but we're going to set it to 1024 because some SSH clients I run into don't like small keys at this point. 512 is not very big. So that generated my key. If you want to look at your key, you do show crypto my pub key RSA, I think is the command. Show crypto. Yeah. I can't use the tab complete because I'm in config, so if we go out, we can do show crypto, the question mark, key, my pub key, RSA. So I missed the keyword in that. So that shows your key. Nothing really exciting to look at, but just that's how you can see if you have one. So we'll go back into config T. And in order to use SSH, we need to do a couple things. We need to modify the line VTY 015 config. We need to set the transport input. We need to change this. Right now, I don't know what the default is, but we're going to set it anyway. We're going to go ahead and set it to SSH. So that only allows SSH. And we're going to need to also change it from login. Remember we typed login, we did Telnet. We're going to need to change it to login local to tell it to use the local user database. And then we're also going to want to create a user because we don't need people sharing passwords. So this is just a good practice. We can know who's logged in. Username, Rich, password, and I'll set the password to Cisco. Yeah, Cisco. So now I have SSH enabled. I created a username. I changed the login to login local to use my username. So now in theory I should be able to SSH -L tells it which username to use. I'm going to do rich, and then I'm going to put the IP address. And it's going to ask me for the password, which I set to Cisco. So there you go. So now I'm logged into the router over SSH using my username. To get elevated access, I type enable and I put in the enable password, and then I have elevated access. So that's cool. I didn't want to get rid of that command prompt. So another thing we can do, if we want to set our users up to have elevated privileges by default, we can modify our user to give it a higher privilege level. The highest privilege level is 15. So I'm going to modify my rich user. Rich user now has a privilege level of 15. So now Rich should be able to SSH. And as soon as I log in, check that out. See the # prompt? I'm already in elevated access. So now I can do cool things without having to type enable. So that is how you can set up SSH on the router. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to tell you about that. I think that was all I wanted to tell you about that for now. So if we look at the running config, we need to set up SSH. We need to have a host name. We need to have an enable secret, probably. Definitely did for Telnet. We need a user and a password. We need to set the domain name. We need to have the VTY lines configured for SSH. We need to use login local, and we needed to generate a key. So that is how to do it on the router. The switch is very similar in that we're going to run the same commands, but initially we need to do something different on the switch. Right now our switch does not have an IP address, so we need to give it an IP address in one of our VLANs. And what we're going to do is we're going to give it an IP address on the VLAN 2 interface, because we have VLAN 2 and 3. So in VLAN 2, we're going to give it an IP address in that subnet. So that subnet is 2. something, so I'll give it 2.10. And if you notice, it says change state to up, so it's already up, so we don't need to do a no shutdown. So let's see if we can ping it from our PC. 2.10. Lots of times in the simulator the first ping fails, so we'll wait for that first one to fail, and then there we go. Check that out. So I have IP connectivity now from my VLAN 2 PC to my switch. So now it's a lot of the same commands. So I need to set a host name. Host name, last name, dash, switch. I need to set a domain name. Domain dash name, cnt.lab. I need to generate a crypto key, generate RSA. We'll do 1024 again, right? I need to set an enable password, enable secret. Actually, let's not do that yet. I'm going to create a user, user rich, password, Cisco, and then I'm going to give my username elevated privileges and see if I can get in without an enable password. Since I didn't need the enable password, I wonder if that's going to work. I don't know. So now we need to configure the VTY lines. So we're going to do transport input SSH, and we're going to do login local. So unless I missed a command, we should be able to SSH into the switch now. So SSH-L rich 192.168.2.10. The password was Cisco, and it let me in at the elevated prompt, even though I don't have an enable password set. So that's cool to know. I'm pretty sure you're probably going to want to have an enable password set all the time anyway, but it's good to know that if you have elevated privileges as an elevated user, that'll let you in. So that's cool. That's how you do the switch. A couple other things I want to look at. One, let's make sure Telnet doesn't work. Although if it does work, I don't know what I'm going to do because it's probably just a bug in the simulator, but I told it not to work. So there you go, good. It failed to let me log in. And one other thing we need to consider, we configured the VLAN 2 interface, so do we have connectivity from VLAN 3? Let's try from VLAN 3. No, it's 2.1 was the VLAN 2 interface. That's the IP address we put on the switch, so I need to SSH to 2.10. So it doesn't look like that's going to work. So that's weird. So let's see if we can go to 2.1, which is the router interface. Oh, we can get to the router interface, which is good and weird, but why can't we get to the switch interface? 2.10 is the switch. We can get to 2.1, but not 2.10. What's up? Well, hopefully it's starting to sink in that if you're not on the same subnet, you need to send traffic to a gateway, and we did not configure a gateway on the switch. So if we go back to the switch, we can use the IP default gateway command, set it to 2.1 for our default gateway on our switch, and now we should be able to connect from the VLAN 3 PC. Hey, check that out, right? So hopefully this is all starting to make sense to you now. If we do not have a gateway, we cannot communicate with devices that are not on our same subnet. Since our VLAN 2 PC was on the same subnet, we could communicate with the switch in VLAN 2, but we could not communicate with the switch from VLAN 3 because the switch was not sending traffic back to the router because the switch was not configured to use the router. So that's the config for remote access on the router and the switch. I'm pretty sure I'm going to modify every lab from here on out to tell you to configure remote access on your router and your switch at the beginning of the lab, so then we can SSH into the lab instead of having to deal with the console cables, switching them around constantly, and also seemingly causing blue screens on our Windows PCs. So hopefully you will take a note to stick this on the first page of your notebook, so every week when we're doing this, you can do it. I'm pretty sure I'll probably add it to the midterm exam too, because this seems like a fun thing for us to do on the midterm exam. So that is that.